Hot takeout: the Mario movie brothers should be canon. I agree with that. So far we are 1 for 1.
It's too many colors, man. It's ugly.
It's a lot of colors.
It's the equivalent of a airbrush side of a van.
I wish.
Let me explain.
Well, that's definitely a hot take from the beginning.
First of all, hello. Welcome to the first hot takeout video that is actually a negative take of mine.
Secondly, hey folks, here's a list of people not to be mad at if you decide to be mad about this opinion.
We don't get mad about anything.
Can you tell the internet has traumatized me over?
People shouldn't get mad about positions in general, especially over something as trivial as a video game. You could disagree, but when you get mad at things on the internet, the power of anonymity gives you social media beer muscles. Like, as of right now, I think I might disagree, but you're never going to bring someone over to the other side whenever you're swinging with social media beer muscles. So
Years or
this is
what?
31 minutes.
Me for having this completely subjective opinion. The developers of the games and the individual concept artists of the game especially. I have nothing but deep admiration.
It's always okay to be mad at Peter. And it's an interesting thing. I don't know if positions on art are entirely subjective either. Art, in some sense, is a representation of things we want to perceive to be as true. In some way, they're a mirror of the actual world, which is objective. So there's taste. That's definitely a part of it. Like, I have tastes that are different than all of you, and that taste conditions me in a way to be different. But I think the taste is still aligned to some sense of objective reality that we all unify upon to, like a common ground.
And empathy for art teams on games. Like, you have a cool idea that you're way into creating, and at any moment your boss can just reject the whole thing and force you to make the ugliest shit of your life, because hey, that's your job.
It's gonna be language here.
With that out of the way, here's the hot take.
Language.
I think Horizon's really ugly.
Like, why do people want to look at this for 60 hours? That's ugh. I'm an old lady who's been out of art college for over a decade now, and it's been even longer than that since I took a color theory class, so bear with me as I forget the exact terminologies of the things I'm trying to explain here. Right now you're probably thinking, what the hell is wrong with you? Horizon's graphics are gorgeous. Next, I want to stop you right there. Stop. Don't. I'm not talking about graphical fidelity. That is not the take. The graphics are crazy in this game. Trust me, I'm way into the peach fuzz.
So here's a question: Would you compare the modern day graphic fidelity and the realism of graphics to the Renaissance realism, or even pre Baroque period? Anything like Baroque starts to play with tenebrism and all these aspects of art that I think bring more drama. But I think that happens in Horizon. So like, the graphics are great, but I think that's a part of the conversation personally. That's me.
And I also want to explain my statement here about too many colors. That was me being, hyperbolic. What was I gonna go on a whole detailed rant about composition?
As a Jewish person and Italian person, I get the hyperbolic nature. We're not dramatic at all.
And values right on the stream then and there. I'm not a damn freak. No, I was gonna make a reductive statement for mildly comedic effect that people were gonna mock me for when they took it at complete total face value. Anyway, let's unreductive that statement because yes, too many colors is a bonkers take on the face of it.
It's all so beautiful, but it's too much.
I think I know where she's going with this. And I think this goes back to what we talked about maybe about 20 minutes ago or 30 minutes ago, which is nuance doesn't catch people's attention. And so you almost have to lead with something that is eye-catching in a way. Now, I think what makes something purely, and they might have talked about this on the podcast too, but what makes something purely a matter of clickbait is if what they say isn't expanded upon in the content itself. So like if it's something that's like, oh my gosh, did you see this? But it's like something completely irrelevant, that's clickbait. But if they're if they lead with a hot take like that, but then they bring you into a nuanced perspective on what they're trying to make, I don't know. I don't necessarily like. At the end of the day, you're trying to want to grab people to listen. So morally, like, case in point, have you heard the good news? Like, you know, like there's some like, yes, it is great news once you hear about it, but like.
However, a visual and
I would
spatial
agree.
reasoning issue can sometimes rear its head when a piece of media is oversaturated and densely packed with many colors. This can be prevented by using simple shapes, as seen in stuff like Katamari Damacy. If the prince was high-res and had peach fuzz, and every object in the game was photorealistically detailed, the already hyper-candy-colored game would almost certainly be incredibly hard to visually parse. Psychonauts 2 has some incredibly psychedelic moments, but you're rarely genuinely confused in navigating those spaces. This is not only due to the striking and iconic shapes of the characters in the levels, but also due to how the level is laid out and lit. It's all very intentional game design. Level designers, artists, lighting artists, animators, and more combining their talents to lead your eye, and therefore you, the player, around to the most important things. And it comes naturally. It doesn't feel like you're being led around by the hand in order to progress. So the self-satisfaction of navigating the space feels really good.
I agree with this point they're making here completely. And I think of another example of Breath of the Wild. And I think this person talked about that on the podcast as well. But Breath of the Wild's art direction very much is around the idea of giving you a specific type of feel, but also to help pull you into the game. So like it's a symphony of all kinds of art and technical effort to make a game. You have music, you have the art direction itself, you have the game design, you have the technical engineering that makes the game engine work the way it does. So there's all that, but they have to complement each other. And with Breath of the Wild, a lot of the art design, again, it's not photorealistic, but I climb up on a mountain and I look across the mountain and my eyes are going to be attracted to things that aren't necessarily screaming at me like in an Ubisoft game or like, look at this icon, but are naturally designed in a way to pull me in. Whether it's a certain horizon, whether there's a certain tree placed in a certain place, the sun's hitting something a certain way from the perspective I'm standing. They think through all of that. And I could see the idea that if you saturate too much, it makes the world harder to navigate in. And from a game design and game experience perspective, I do see how that can make it more difficult.
The fact that much of it takes place in fairly dense, very high fidelity, and quite colorful environments leads to a lot more visual confusion. For example, the yellow tells of things that you can grapple and interact with, they kind of blend in when everything else around it is also pretty damn colorful.
I could see that.
I'm going to talk about that a bit more later. This kind of confusion is prevented in another vast open world game that is way less focused on graphical fidelity because, well, the Switch is the Switch. Breath of the Wild.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, we're tired of hearing of it. I don't care. It's still relevant. The
Greatest
console's
game.
graphical
Greatest
limitations were probably a good thing. And Breath of the Wild makes up for it with a stylized art direction, a more muted color palette, and environmental design that was very carefully constructed to urge you to explore more.
Yeah.
This all results in a game that is completely understandable at a glance, easy on the eyes, and easy to navigate. Because when everything looks equally as vibrant and important, a player is more likely to flounder about, forget what they're doing, get distracted, and get lost. Low-key, this is one of the reasons why I think Horizon's protagonist, Aloy, is pretty chatty.
I don't know what that means. Oh, chatty? Yeah. Yeah, again, Breath of the Wild, you're pulled into all these different things to interact with, but there's not really, like, you're supposed to mark the world yourself and explore it, and that's a good example for sure. It's going to set the tone for a lot of games. There's, like, enough mystery, but there's also enough draw. Yeah, no, that's what it is. The mystery draws you in more with how the art complements the game itself. Let's see. So a lot of the game narrative is it's trying to help you overcome. That had to be intentional.
Detach the cables. Okay, clicking doesn't sound good.
Yeah, I see that completely. I see that completely. It adds to the experience of the game itself by having that thought out loud aspect. And I think it's an impressive aspect of the game, but I could see how it helps overcome some of this confusion. Like, if you didn't have this, I wonder how people would have played the game.
To kind of help you through a level, but I think the devs actually nerfed how chatty she was in a patch. I'm not sure. Anyway, when I was watching my partner play the second game, I was taken aback by how often Aloy reminds the player of what they were doing, where they were going, and what they ought to do next. Like, I cannot find this part of the...
Something you don't experience ever in Breath of the Wild. Which, to be fair, both are open world games. I love Horizon Zero Dawn. It's a great game. Breath of the Wild is on another level. And again, I think a lot of it comes from the mystery that, you know, Link isn't speaking. He is your link to that world, the agency of that world. And yeah, this is interesting.
The game to...
Another interesting point too. Whenever they made Twilight Princess was a very realistic game, but because of that, it almost ages easier. But Wind Waker, a game that is... I love Wind Waker. People were very upset with Wind Waker when it came out. But Wind Waker is almost timeless in a sense because of its shaded approach. So...
She was climbing Aloy comes to like a cliff, right? And she's like, gotta climb this cliff. It's like, okay. So you start climbing the cliff. And like along the way, she says like 2 more times that she is climbing the cliff. Her progress up this cliff is like pretty handholdy to me with all this chatting. Please don't comment. Like,
it's an impressive technical demo.
Reason she talks all the time to herself. She's a loner and an outcast. And that's why she's always talking to herself out loud. Because like, I'm kind of sick of hearing that already. That's a pretty unconvincing justification for the amount of hand-holding that I've seen. I mean...
I think it's weird if you don't constantly talking about yourself throughout your day. Mark's going to drink a cup of water. Mark's going to go to the bathroom now. Mark's going to eat a bagel.
I have a theory that Horizon's color design is a backlash to the 2010s AAA monochrome color palette. Not necessarily like a cognizant, like, we'll get back at those gray-ass, brown-ass games sort of decision, but like, you know, aesthetic cycles are a real thing. Like, you know how the 1960s was all like whacked out colorful? And then bam, the 70s happened and everything turned to actual dirt with some orange in there. Then the 80s and 90s happened and everyone went to neons as a backlash to the earthy tones of the 70s. Then the aughts and the 2010s were back to muted monochrome style color palettes. Your grays, your browns, your blues. And now it's 2022 and everybody's a rainbow-haired freak and it rolls. Aesthetic cycles.
I wonder how commercialization of a lot of things such as clothing, a lot of consumer products and the way we consume basic goods nowadays has impacted the rapid nature of these types of cycles. Because, if, you know, art direction in the past lasted for a few centuries, right? And it seems like, taking literal art aside, but like the consumer approach where like what you see in movies or games and all that, there's something to that. And I do wonder if it's a combination of how commercialization's always constantly trying to catch your eye and do something different. Because it also, like, you're always trying to sell clothes nowadays, which in the past it was like clothes are they're like just you need them. There wasn't as much concern about the basic, beyond the basic, so to say.
But anyway, to wrap up this little section of the video, it may sound kind of crazy, but when there's this much color going on, it actually makes a game less boring colors in the early aughts games. Blurred. Can you tell which ones are...
Which ones are what? What do you think, chat? Super Mario Odyssey.
Easily?
Is that Crash Bandicoot? This looks like Resident Evil 4. I forget the name of that game. I thought about that, and I think that these cycles are going faster, but I think also since we're so close to current trends, we tend to make finer distinctions, and so we can see more cycles than they really are from a larger perspective. There's something to that where, like, from the perspective of history 200 years from now, where they'll be like, yeah, there is actually a lot of these things that they all had something in common, more so than we realize now, where we're so hyper-focused on the small things. Yeah, being being like face to face with the blanket and not seeing the whole kind of crescendo of what's being made from a great distance that you have with history. I also get that. I mean, yeah, it definitely has something to do with consoles' abilities, but at the same time, I think there's also the idea that they're trying to sell something, and so if they're trying to sell you a new console, they want to show you what the console can do. It doesn't necessarily mean what it should do. And again, going back to the conversation about Breath of the Wild, I mean, other games on the Switch have done more realistically pleasing aesthetics, but the Breath of the Wild was all about making the best game. You know, I think I got 3 or 4. Neon white.
Going to be a lot.
Nothing really stands out.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I was able to get this one. I knew this game. I just don't know the name of it. Paper Hearts or something like that. I was right about Crash. I got Resident Evil 4, but they all kind of, yeah, that's interesting.
Remember when Fury Road came out and everyone was rightfully going bonkers about how well edited it was? How editor Margaret Sixel made sure all the action takes place almost exactly in the center of the frame so your eyes didn't have to dart around to find points of interest to focus on? Well, video games don't have that luxury outside of cutscenes a lot of the times. In most AAA games is in the control of the player generally. And this creates a problem. How to make sure the player is taking in the correct information, making informed, purposeful decisions, and going the right way in general. When that isn't an option during active gameplay, the game has to rely on visual cues. And baby, I'm talking color, contrast, and composition / environmental density. And, okay,
Before we get into this, I mean, I agree with that too. Like a movie and a book and two similar forms of art that give you a story are also very much driven by a linear control of the creator. You experience what they want you to experience. Games very much have that, but they give you a lot more agency with how you go about experiencing the world. It's like a Goosebump choose your own adventure, but on another level. And so how do you deal with the fact that in a game you might go from page 5 to page 70, you know, in an open world game too. So how do you give people that freedom and make something great out of it? I think Breath of the Wild gives you that. Like first 20 hours of Breath of the Wild, I did a bunch of stuff that had nothing to do with the main storyline, but then eventually through very, you know, some subtle, but also some very intentional cues, I got back onto the main quest line as well.
contrast just means like something here is different than something else, so it sticks out. There's different kinds of contrast, but personally here I'm using it to mean the differences between.
This is kind of a good example of tenebrism from the Baroque period. Like what I love about the Baroque style of art, like Caravaggio being, I think, the person that epitomizes that the most is, the contrast of a scene is using it's using that light to draw your eyes towards the drama of what's happening. Where if you think about a lot of the more classical Renaissance period artwork from the beginning, there's a lot going on and it's all very gorgeous, but it could be, it's not that, it's more about taking the whole entire scene, and where like Caravaggio's like The Calling of St. Matthew and all those awesome scenes, they're so dramatic and they're also very simple in a way too, but there's still a realism to it as well. And with that use of lights and drama, it gives you a deeper truth, like a deeper sense of what is happening on there just besides the material level,
Light areas and dark areas.
The emotion.
In the scene. How stark or wishy-washy is that difference? High contrast helps with visibility, especially when there's a lack of colors. The more monotone an image is, the more important the light and dark contrast will be to keep things visually understandable. For example, if we desaturated that Mad Max footage from earlier, it still looks pretty damn good. You can understand all the things that are happening in it. Ghost of Tsushima mode that desaturated the game entirely and added a film grain or whatever. It's not quite the look of its namesake, but it does prove a decent point that the devs were pretty aware of their lighting. And if you do this to Horizon, it's I guess it depends on the scene, but it's not as good as Ghost of Tsushima. And finally, composition, meaning how things are arranged for you to visually take in. How many objects are in the scene,
Agreed,
and how
Jürgen.
are they distributed? How many colors, how many lights and shadows, and how much movement?
Scene composition greatly affects the focus of the player or the viewer. However, since the games we're talking about have cameras that are largely in control of the player, shot composition isn't quite applicable, so I'm just calling it environmental density. How much clutter is up in this place? Can you see your objective from here, or is there like a bunch of junk in the way? And you know, it just keeps on coming down to this. The simpler the aesthetic is, the easier it is to lead a player to the correct solution or path. Portal was an FPS puzzle genre pioneer.
I still need to play Portal. I've never played Portal. I don't think I'm a real gamer.
Laboratory environment, players could easily suss out what their objectives were visually.
Yeah.
And the only hard part was learning how to use the portal gun.
Think about in Fortnite, like Fortnite versus Apex Legends. Apex Legends was stressful to me as a battle royale because a lot of the game, you got motion sickness playing Portal. A lot of the gameplay was, you know, it was challenging compared to a Fortnite, but it was so realistic in a way, and there were visual cues. There, I would use this argument. There was a lot of clutter on the screen as well that made it harder for me to jump into it. Where Fortnite uses a very simple artistic style to draw you in to everything it wants you to interact with. You know, the sounds of a chest, the glowing of an item, you know, the communication of what each item is going to do for you. Oh, this is a better item. I know that simply by seeing the hue of the item itself. That's a good use of art direction to draw you in.
Haven't played Portal with the developer commentary on, you're really missing out in my opinion.
I gotta try that.
Early versions of Portal featured more detailed, cluttered environments, much like Half-Life 2. We quickly realized that unnecessary objects scattered all over the place distracted players to the point where it actually interfered with the Portal training process. So we simplified the art style to favor clean, focused test chambers. The modular approach we settled on makes it look plausible that the chambers can reform dynamically on these pistons.
It's a game with
sense.
pretty much no cutscenes and very few overt tutorial moments, relying instead on the player's natural curiosity and experimentation, which is encouraged by the simplicity of the game's design. It has very low environmental density, so the objectives are clear and the player is not distracted too easily. It uses the simplest, highest contrast colors possible for its environments: white, gray, black, tiny bits of red. These are totally different colors from the active gameplay mechanic colors, orange and blue for the portals. Remember how I mentioned orange and blue before? Yep, it's that color wheel thing. Complementary colors are the hues that are opposite each other on the wheel.
Okay.
And when they're smacked up next to each other, they kind of pop. This is why so many action movie posters are orange and blue, by the way. Most human
Makes
skin
sense.
tones are warm, somewhere along the orange spectrum, and most posters in general feature the main character's big-ass face. So their skin tones are often paired with cool blues to make the poster more eye-catching. Okay, now I want to talk real quick about neon white, because it's an excellent modern example of what I'm kind of talking about here. This is an FPS that uses color, contrast, and low environmental density to keep the player moving fast, staying
You won't be able to go fast in this game if there was all this stuff around you, right? This is one of those things where it's almost like tunnel vision. You see what you need to see. Also, I've heard great things about Neon White. Still need to play it.
capable of reacting in a second to new visual information.
I think so
rushing
far
in.
I agree with a lot
And
of it.
Of course, when Neon White does visually
I don't-
overwhelm you on purpose to raise the stakes,
I think it comes down
feels
to
appropriate.
the need to
Even
get
though
people's
it's a
attention.
scramble to parse the level, you've seen enough of this stuff by this point that adding more visual complexity is a reasonable difficulty spike to keep things interesting. The levels are mostly white, the demons are mainly black, and this high contrast choice makes the enemies immediately visually apparent. The cards are a variety of colors, and the projectiles are color-coded to what weapon the demon will drop.
Yeah.
This is a really clear, consistent visual language. It just
The artwork
works.
communicates to you.
Another example I want to bring up is Uncharted, whose influence on games like Tomb Raider and Horizon are pretty obvious, even though Horizon is open world and the others aren't. But whatever.
I still need to
Uncharted
play
is a
the
great
Uncharted
example
games.
of an
Uncharted
action game
games,
from the early aughts that didn't
I enjoyed the
go all
movie.
way with that monochrome brown, gray, blue wash. While there's definite monochrome and washed out bits, they're used to contrast the strikingly colorful bits, making them impressive and memorable. Uncharted also uses mist and clouds to create a sense of real depth in the environment, which is something that Horizon went a little too whole hog on, in my opinion. The first to deal with a major visual parsing problem that crops up in somewhat realistic looking adventure games. How do we know which ledges are grabbable, climbable? In linear games like Uncharted and Tomb Raider, there's probably only a few correct paths to proceed, so it's incredibly important that the player doesn't get stuck on something as
Right, yeah, like if you're gonna ultimately say it's ugly, like I don't know if it's ugly, but I agree with the premises. I think maybe and she explained herself in the beginning, right, that like, hey, I realized what I said was very much hyperbolic. I realized what I said was very much to catch your attention and was trying to be comedic. Now, to be fair, this is like a comedy-based gaming show. Everyone's trying to be funny. So, all that aside, the premises are sound. So, I think to some degree, what what I would say if it was like total, yeah, and I think Eugen, that's the take you're saying, and I think that's the take being laid out here is that the art direction, if anything, matters in drawing you into the game, right, and making you experience the game, and on top of that, I think there is something to say about clutter. I would say my experience with Apex Legends speaks to me in this regards.
stupid as I didn't know I could climb that. Ugh. And because of that, say hello to the conveniently colorful or conveniently contrasted ledge. I call it Please Climb Me paint. And when the conveniently colorful or contrasted ledge isn't an option in games that would look really weird as hell with them, the go-to solution is detective vision, a la Arkham Asylum. This did, however, lead to a bit of a problem where players would simply play the whole game in detective vision, which is a bit of a waste, huh? They spent all this time making the game look dark and brooding and Batman-y, and the players are walking around in this garish orangey blue cyber zone. That's a shame.
That is, to be fair, in a game like this, I did always make sure I'd activate something like that in every room I went in, just to make sure I wasn't missing something. Yeah. I mean, it's a challenge, right? You're never going to get the perfect hit, but it complements the narrative of the game to do something like detective vision, because you're Batman. Batman better than Superman.
And here's what's weird. Batman, with its largely monochrome dark
do.
aesthetic, has the same solution to finding climbable, interactable places as the hyper-saturated Horizon, detective vision. But why is that? Like I said reductively earlier, too many colors. Horizon is a game that takes place in the super distant future, but still there's some structures around with, you know, you guessed it, Please Climb Me paint. Damn, that's some sturdy paint to last, I don't know, 10,000 years? Also a bunch of natural formations that Aloy can climb that wouldn't make sense to have Please Climb Me paint on them, so that's where detective vision largely comes in. Okay, it's called the focus in this, but, you know, whatever. Detective vision. The way detective vision works in this game is also
that's a
a lot
lot.
like how it works in Batman. It, you know, decodes data, and it highlights suspicious or interactable stuff in the area in a color that reoccurs all the time in the rest of the environments, in the flora, fauna, the sky, and it can disappear during certain times of the day, which, this is a bit of a rant. I want to talk about the climbing mechanics in both of them. Did the climbing actually get worse in Forbidden West? Well, kind of.
I haven't
The thing
played
is,
it. Yeah.
There were way less ledges in
I think overall, I found Horizon Zero Dawn pretty easy to navigate. Like I agree again with a lot of these premises, but I didn't explore the world more naturally. A lot of the time, I would use the maps and the other kind of markers on the maps that allowed me to get to where I wanted to go. It was more or less I have a purpose. I'm going here, here, and here. While I enjoyed my experience in the game, I contrasted again with the Breath of the Wild, which was very much more of I'm just enjoying being here and breathing this in. This is insane right now. Like, I feel, as weird as it sounds, again, technically speaking, this is gorgeous, but as weird as it sounds, Breath of the Wild made me feel more a part of it. And I'm sure there's other things besides, you know, like, again, Link doesn't speak, so your thought process becomes his thought process, right? There's a connection. Again, he's your agency. He's your link to that world, where a lot of the conversation with Aloy, and she's talking again, I enjoyed it, but I could see how that could almost bring you out in a way at times. But also, it's important to the story too. So I don't know. I'm a big believer in games are meant to be played. Stories are critical to me, but games obviously are games. So, saying the
Zero
obvious.
So it was clearer where you could actually climb. Plus, one of the criticisms of the first Horizon was that climbing was a bit janky. But when Horizon Forbidden West came out, well, places where you are allowed to climb. The first Horizon's focus ability didn't highlight the climbable rocks, and that's probably because it wasn't that necessary because there's less of them, and
interesting.
look at them, they're jutting right out there. So unfortunately, it seems like increasing the visual fidelity of Horizon from Zero Dawn to Forbidden West.
So interesting. You can confirm this then too. If the first game doesn't point out to where you need to climb when you use that mode, that is saying something that the designers wrestled with. I'm not sure what those conversations were exactly, but a conversation happened, right, to put that much time in that change.
West actually lowered the player's ability to interact with the environment confidently. Hence the Focus's new ability to scan the terrain. This is a band-aid for a lot of problems that are better solved by a change in art direction. Which, don't get me wrong, that is not something I think is easy to do. Especially when you got an established look from a previous game. So of course, they had to add something that attempted to clear the noise. Shouldn't you be comparing Horizon to games of its same genre that came out around the same time? And okay, here we go.
Breath of the Wild Link just falling down. I love this game. You need to play this game. Anyone who hasn't played this game, they need to play this game. Oh, that music.
Yes, I already talked about Breath of the Wild, but I have things to say. It's just so relevant. When you're more confident and have better equipment. Pivoting away from Zelda to another open world game that has climbing and such, the modern Assassin's Creed games. Which, I have my own criticisms of. I'm not really that into them, and yes, there's too many damn markers on the maps, but I can more easily understand what's climbable in this game because they simply, mostly let you just climb stuff.
Yeah.
There's no need to translate what's climbable or not. If you want to skip some stuff, climb around it, find an alternate route, go ahead, whatever. The game developers designed the challenges of the game with the idea in mind that players might try to climb around it. If you're going to put climbing in your game, you have to consider that you put climbing in your game. Help but feel like
That is interesting. So Assassin's Creed is a very gorgeous game too, and it tends to have in Odyssey, for example, when you're in the Mediterranean area, there's a lot of color. It's beautiful and rich and vibrant. But the game mechanic there makes you less concerned about having to figure out what you can find or explore. Now, I think the map markers in Ubisoft's games, and exampled in Assassin's Creed, or another example of that focus mode that Breath of the Wild gets away from. But I do wonder if Horizon Zero Dawn, if there was more of a greater verticality and an increase of what she could climb in the game without having to worry about if you can climb it, if that would have made it less of a conversation whenever it comes to how the art style complements the game design, essentially.
the game still doesn't trust me to tie my own shoes even hours into it. Like I said, I don't know if they changed this with that velocity patch that I may or may not have imagined or dreamt about, but I swear I recall Aloy solving puzzles out loud before you could even take in the environment. All these games are practically the same genre, but like, why does one feel like freedom and one feels like I'm on one of those child leashes? There's a bunch of factors, obviously. This is not me going like, aha, I've figured it out or something. This is also just my opinion, also, obviously. And I don't blame the art direction for everything I don't like about Horizon, but I think the general visual busyness of the game is some...
And I think as we were just saying, right? Like, if the game style itself was different, with climbing specifically, maybe the art direction wouldn't have been so burdensome of an impact on trying to navigate what you can or can't climb. Yeah, you feel like you're almost glitching way up the mountain. Yeah, I mean, that's Skyrim. That's Skyrim to me. I like Skyrim, but like people are like, oh, it's such a great game. And I'm like, I have no idea where I'm going or why. It's just a mountain. I ended up dying because I travel somewhere and get stuck, and then my save breaks, and I can't, there's glitches, and it's Bethesda.
Somewhat related to how much it doesn't trust the player to figure things out for themselves.
It's an art style that suits the game while fulfilling the playability demands without losing a feeling of reality. So what's playability? The pleasantness of behaviors or visuals based on gameplay, or in other words, function. For a game, the optimization of the pleasantness of the game cycle and response is the most important thing. A reality players can sink into. This is also very important. As you move further away from realness,
This is interesting. I wonder if they're going to basically say what we're talking about here, where it's like, how do you complement the playability, climbing, with the reality of the art direction? Are they one extreme over the other? You know,
both tempo and visibility improve and the level of pleasantness increases, but the reality of the world is apt to be lost. That being said, if you place too much importance on the realness of behavior and presentation, you can damage a pleasant game cycle and responsiveness.
And maybe, as a result, maybe that's why we have detective vision and please climb me paint and a really chatty hand-holdy protagonist, all to keep the player from realizing that without those things, they might be lost, confused, and unable to progress. The worry, and it's not a crazy thing to be worried about if you're making a game, is that if the player is ever frustrated in the slightest bit, they might stop playing the game. And of course, on the other end of that design ethos is the Soulsborne games, which thrive on their difficulty and do not give a shit if you're frustrated. But meanwhile, they're also visually stunning in their own ways. All right, in conclusion, it's pretty clear that the Horizon games are what most people would call extremely pretty. Absolutely sure, you're not crazy to look at this stuff and say, that's pretty. It's fine to think this is pretty. It's fine. It's cool. You're fine. To me, however, it's just a lot. It's overly pretty. It becomes cloying and gaudy and honestly, like a little bit boring after a certain point. Like, when everything's pretty and eye-catching, nothing is.
right. I mean, again, keeping that last point in mind. So it is a conversation about how the prettiness of it impacts the playability of it, and how certain decisions with the playability of it impacts how you can enjoy the reality of the world too, like the climbing system conversation again. I don't disagree with the premises laid out, especially at the end, if you can admit from some degree it's aesthetically pleasing. Now, to Yugen, your comment about the art style having a purpose, yeah, I mean, so we would have to research that. Now, what do we know about the Horizon Zero Dawn story and purpose there? Horizon Zero Dawn is a conversation about how humanity's desire to sterilize and separate themselves from nature and creation itself has led to a destruction of creation. And with that destruction, you now live in a kind of world where human civilization has died out, but creation's still being there, right? And knowing like a lot of the themes that are in the first game, because I only played the first game, like there's reference to like Rachel Carlson, who's a big hero when it comes to like people that are what you would call an environmentalist. And I do think to that point, a lot of the environmental beauty of a Horizon Zero Dawn could be attached to maybe some ethos in the art team saying, we want to make creation shine. So knowing that as a potential goal, I could see why Horizon Zero Dawn looks the way it looks. And maybe that's one of the potentials. Again, we don't know of what the art style was intended about, but we know what the story is. And obviously the art style is trying to complement a story in some way. Like Elden Ring, Dark Souls, those art styles are very dark. The story is very dark. You're not going to have a neon bright Dark Souls game. It would feel somewhat weird, right? That being said, I do think that axis of like playability versus reality and how that impacts it, I think that makes a lot of sense. And again, I could easily see as someone who played both games, liked both games for what they are. And again, I like Horizon Zero Dawn for the story and its kind of purpose of the story about humanity, or you know what we do with AI and all that stuff. I think it's really cool. And again, they hearken to very real figures who are aligned to certain movements in our society. So all that aside, I think Horizon Zero Dawn is good for that. Breath of the Wild is a class of a different own. It's trying to do a different thing. And yeah. Maybe it's almost meant to seem paradise-like a paradise that's been lost. I don't know. And I maybe that fits with the idea again of like the need to not sterilize and bulldoze and put up parking lots and Walmarts everywhere, but like that we'd have a desire to kind of remember, we almost have a memory of this paradise. And again, I can see the art style on Horizon getting that to a T. I like it. And there being that hyper realism. But I do think, again, how does that hyper realism balance with the playability of a game? Making games is hard. And if people don't enjoy the feel of the game, they're going to bounce off no matter how gorgeous it's looking. That's something that was said in the chat. And I think that makes a lot of sense. So that was interesting. Hot takes aside, I don't disagree with the premises overall. And I think it's just something to think about. You know, if I was on the Horizon Zero Dawn team, I would think something like this. I would hear something like this and go, you know what? There's points here we could take away to deciding how we maybe adjust our playability in the future. Maybe, you know?